We're following breaking news here on CBS Sports HQ, where it looks like CJ McCollum is leaving Rip City. Multiple reports saying the Trailblazers are working to trade McCollum to the Pelicans in exchange for Josh Hart and draft compensation. The move would split up the duo of McCollum and Damian Lillard and pair him with Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram. So many years the two of these guys have been together. Playoff runs that fell short, Dame time and CJ. And at the start of this season, back in late November, they both had a 20-point game in the same game for the 193rd time. It broke a tie with Larry Bird and Robert Parrish for the 10th most such games in NBA history by a duo, and no backcourt duo in NBA history has recorded more such games. We've got Avery Johnson to break down this breaking news. So, Avery, we just talked about C.J. McCollum this morning. You did with Brandon Baylor. Your thoughts on this reported deal to get C.J. McCollum to NOLA in exchange for Josh Hart and picks?
Well, I'm not surprised, Tommy, because we've been talking about Portland Trailblazers as it relates to C.J. McCollum and Damian Lillard for the last year. This was a move that the Portland Trailblazers, pending approval, they had to make. It's just that if it's reported that they're only getting Josh Hart back, they're not getting enough in return. Josh Hart and draft compensation is not enough, but it's also showed the desperation for CJ McCollum to get out of Portland and find a new home. So this would be huge for the Pelicans, somebody who can get his shot off at any time, you know, averaging 20 points a game, shoots close to 40% from the three-point line. The Pelicans are in desperate need. I mean, desperate need to make the playoffs this year and potentially try to advance out of the playoff situation. So from a standpoint of who would win this trade, if it's finalized, the Pelicans definitely would come out on the winning side.
And just to put button up on Portland, those draft picks, we know Portland would get the Pelicans 2023 first-round pick, could get the Lakers 2022, depending on how it shapes out. But they do get Josh Hart, and then they get some much-needed maybe flexibility with the salary. Let's go over here to New Orleans, because I've got a projected starting five, Avery, that has C.J. McCollum, Brandon Ingram, Herb Jones, Zion Williamson, and Jonas Valanciunas.
That's music to the Pelicans' ears when you can insert C.J. McCollum into that lineup, along with a potentially healthy Zion Williamson. He has yet to make an appearance this year. And if he's in shape, he's ready to go. And with the way, you know, CJ can spread the floor, give Zion more room to operate. You look at the emergence of a young man that I coached at Alabama, Herb Jones, who could potentially be first team all rookie in the NBA this year with his attributes defensively. So now you're balanced more offensively and defensively. So this could be a shot in the arm for the Pelicans if they can execute and finalize this trade. So now you're better offensively. And then CJ has experience. You know, he's played in a ton of playoff games, and that's where the Pelicans are trying to go on a consistent basis. So this would be an A+ trade for the Pelicans, and I would call this a C- trade for or C- or D+ trade for the Portland Trailblazers.
All right, Avery Johnson, our coach, handing out the grades on the breaking news. Again, all signs pointing to this deal being done. Coach, certainly appreciate it. Again, taking a look at some added details. We talked about Josh Hart. It looks like Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Tomas Satoransky has been added to the package. Interesting of note, other names that were linked as well from New Orleans perspective. Trey Mayfield III, just a rookie season for Trey there. Also, Jackson Hayes, the 21-year-old 6'11" center, doesn't look.
I want to start with two players who've garnered some trade attention. Where do talks stand around Pistons Jerami Grant and Blazers C.J. McCollum?
And Malika, let's start with Jerami Grant in Detroit. And remember, he's got another year on his contract. This is a Detroit team that is perfectly willing to wait at the draft into the offseason with Jerami Grant. If the trade deadline were in an hour, I'm told they don't really have anything right now that they'd be ready to move on. But you know how this goes. You know, often teams will withhold, their best offers. Teams will start to lower their asking price as we get closer on Thursday. But C.J. McCollum in Portland, I think a couple teams have been fairly aggressive in their pursuit. New Orleans, the New York Knicks. And listen, McCollum has a lot of value around this league. You know what you're getting with him. This is a player who adds a lot of maturity to any locker room he's in. Certainly a dynamic offensive player. And so I think for Portland, you saw them get off, significant salary with the Norman Powell trade and moving Robert Covington out. And so I think right now they can wait and see what is the package that they would want to get back for McCollum. But they're very much engaged in talks. I think by the end of the trade deadline, it's going to be a very different looking Portland Trailblazers roster.
James Harden being traded, saying he's not going anywhere. He also said that Harden repeatedly told him that he wants to stay in Brooklyn for the long term and called all the speculation just noise from the outside. Now, Harden has multiple contract options at his disposal for next season after he turned down that 3-year, $160 million extension in the offseason. Here is one issue. He has been in and out of the lineup with hamstring tightness, same thing that bothered him last season. Nets have dropped 8 straight. They're 29-16 before that skid. That matches the second longest single-season losing streak by a team that entered 10 games or more above 500. And by the way, no NBA champ has ever had an 8-game regular season losing streak. As we are joined now by NBA insider Adrian Wojnarowski. So, Woj, let's pivot to the Lakers, another preseason favorite. They sit at 9th in the West right now. We all saw that Russell Westbrook was benched once more by his head coach, Frank Vogel, for that overtime win over the Knicks on Saturday. What's the likelihood the Lakers are active in the trade market?
Hannah, the Lakers are trying to be active, but the moves that they can make, by and large, are around the edges. They're limited in scope, really by the assets they have on their roster, how their salary structure is built. Remember, they have so much money invested in LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and Russell Westbrook. And Westbrook has a $47 million player option on his deal for next year. That makes trading him very, very unlikely. And so as you move down their roster, the kind of deals they're in the market for, I think role players that might be able to come in, give them some help on the bench. But they used a lot of their assets in the Westbrook trade, which included trading a first-round pick last year. They have another first-rounder that they could send out a few years from now because they owe New Orleans still in the Anthony Davis deal. So I think while the Lakers are on the phones, they're discussing deals. Nothing that I think would be impactful as they try to chase contention in the West.
Yeah, contention, even just making the playoffs, right, at this point. Meanwhile, Ben Simmons remains on the 76ers, obviously the subject of much speculation regarding a deal for James Harden. So what's the latest you're hearing on Simmons and Philly and potential talks before the trade deadline?
Well, Philadelphia certainly, they're going to remain engaged around the league on Ben Simmons, but their asking price has not changed. They want a steep return for Simmons, and it's, teams like Sacramento who had great interest in Simmons. We reported maybe like 10 days ago that they had backed out, that they were going to move on, try to do deals elsewhere, that they just weren't ready to meet the Sixers' price. And I think Philadelphia is ready to take this into the offseason. They would obviously love to get at James Harden either in free agency or via trade, and there'll be other players in the offseason, maybe teams who flame out early in the playoffs, or teams look to break up groups of star players that they think they could then become engaged on Ben Simmons. But this is an organization that will talk through the deadline this week, but I believe they're ready to take this into the offseason toward the draft and free agency. Remember, Ben Simmons is under contract for another 3 years after this season.
Right, so Daryl Morey has not moved off those high expectations he has for a return.